Heavily regulated companies do not want any unmanaged or unauthorized software to run on their devices. This implies less freedom for the users, but these devices are work computers first and foremost and company property. Today we're going to see the basic mechanism. Nothing new, but it's well implemented because it helps the user understand the decision the system makes. We're looking at a Mac in lockdown mode, where the user wants to run an installer for Dropbox. Santa intercepts the process and displays a pop-up with a message. It says to use box.com for cloud hosting files instead. The company points the users toward an approved tool. It created explicit block rules for similar services with a custom message. An approved tool is available in a managed software center and has a corresponding allow rule. Now, the user tries to run WhatsApp, and Santa blocks again. Santa found no rules for WhatsApp, and because we're in lockdown mode, it defaults to block it. This is a view of the test device in the Central Admin Console. When I navigate to the Santa events, I can see the event trail for this device. Here are both decisions from Santa. Block unknown is a decision on WhatsApp, because Santa did not have explicit rules that govern the app. Block team ID is the enforcement of the block rule for the vendor Dropbox. The events can be shipped to a CM solution in real time for further analysis. Let's look at the mechanism to maintain the rules for Santa. The regulated company in our example is going to need an audit trail. For the fixed rules that we've seen, the official Central Terraform provider has a great workflow and it's transparent and secure. This is the commit in our management repository to allow box.com and to block Dropbox. We're adding two resources: a block list policy for Dropbox with a message for our users to use box.com and the allow list policy for box.com. When we create our pull request, the Terraform provider runs basic checks to make sure that our commit is free from errors. The Terraform plan output tells us that it's going to create two new resources that we have committed. Looks good, but we're going to need a review. The peer review from my colleague prevents human error and is good evidence for compliance. Now I can squash and merge the PR. I can now see the rules on the Central Admin Console. So far, we have looked at classic examples of allow listing. Custom messaging and signposting improve the user experience and acceptance by offering alternatives. This is great for security frameworks like Cyber Essentials, where all software is required to be managed by the company. In practice, this binary concept hinders productivity in dynamic environments and causes friction with the users, and allow listing is often discarded. As a result, IT teams struggle with sprawling shadow IT and have to resort to blocking the worst pieces of software they can find. A user-driven application governance system can deliver much-needed middle ground here. The solution is to add a third status to allow listing that sits between allowed and blocked by default, the controlled exceptions. Central uses scores to decide which status an app has. An app starts its lifecycle as blocked by default because it's unknown and untrusted. Users and admins vote on apps to change their score. When an app reaches a certain score, called a threshold, it changes its status. At the first threshold, the status changes from untrusted to tolerated. In this state, the system gives user-bound permissions to any user who votes for the app. The spread of the app is clearly monitored with an audit trail. For all other users, it remains blocked. When the app clears the second threshold, Central promotes it from tolerated to allow listed. Now the app runs by default for everyone. Ideally, the IT team now manages the app. For this scenario, where a regulated company is trying to control shadow IT, we are going to require admin approval for each status change. Our users cannot make decisions as a swarm. Let's say we have 100 users with a voting power of 1 each. Admins get a voting power of 500. We're going to set the threshold for tolerated to 500. An app can only clear the threshold with one admin vote. The threshold for allow listed will be 1000. This means it requires 2 admin votes for the approval to clear. This is a great process because you can have controlled exceptions to the only managed software is allowed paradigm without opening the floodgates. Malware and unauthorized software cannot execute because Santa blocks it by default. After a quick admin approval process, Central will allow user-bound permissions. With peer review, the app can finally enter the company-managed portfolio. Let's see how users can request exceptions for blocked apps in lockdown mode. I will demonstrate this with a simple example of user voting. User-bound permissions are a great way for regulated businesses to grant exceptions to use certain software while keeping shadow IT at bay. I'm going to make this easy by assuming that an admin has already reviewed the app in question. It is not considered harmful, and users are allowed to get exceptions to use it. Here's our Mac in lockdown mode again. This time, the user is trying to run an app called Rectangle. When Santa intercepts the launch, the user requests an exception. A user portal opens where the user is signed in with single sign-on. It displays basic information about the app, such as the name and the publisher. Conveniently, this app already has tolerated status. All the user needs to do is to cast a vote to get the permission to use the app. Note how the score of the app changes from 500 to 501. In Managed Software Center, the user can run a rule sync script. They do not have to wait for the automatic sync that happens every 10 minutes. Now the app runs. This is the ballots view in the Central admin console. You can see all the votes that occurred in the system. My admin vote with a power of 500 and the test user vote with a power of 1. As usual, Central makes all voting events available for further processing and analysis. The company in our example adheres to strict standards and requires admin approval before anyone can receive user-bound permission to use an app. This review process prevents shadow IT by creating a software category that is unmanaged but tolerated. All exceptions are user-bound and on the audit trail. Now we're going to focus on the admin perspective in the following demo. Our user wants to run an app called Pure Paste that Santa blocks as usual. The user logs onto the user portal where they cast a vote to allow the app. The app score changes from 0 to 1, but the status remains untrusted. This is because the score has not reached the threshold of 500 that the company in our example requires to create user-bound exceptions. Our user is going to need admin approval. This is the ballots view in the Central admin console, where I can see all the votes that have happened on the system. When I filter with waiting for my ballots only, I can see a list of votes for apps that are still untrusted and need my vote for approval. In the details page, after my very careful review, I can select to upvote the app with my voting power of 500 and change the status of the app to tolerated. After the next rule sync, the app runs on the test user's device. We are going to have a closer look at the last step of the app governance process next. We've come a very long way. There's a block list that we're maintaining with signposting that guides users to company-accepted alternatives where possible. We also have a list of apps that are tolerated along with user-bound permissions for them. This is great, but we shouldn't keep apps in this state forever. Popular apps should ultimately enter the company-managed portfolio. Which apps should be promoted? Now that we have data on the app usage, we can make our decisions guided by our users and their preferences. This is the targets view in the Central admin console. We're going to use filters to narrow down candidates of our allow list. I'm going to set the filter for the state to tolerated, and I will order the results by the highest scores. This will return the apps with the most user-bound permissions on top of my list. Surprisingly, there's an app called Chrome that's very popular with our users. Another admin had promoted it to tolerate it earlier. Chrome's score sits at 501, and to get allow listed, it needs an admin vote with a power of 500 to get to a score of at least 1000. Before I proceed to voting, I'm going to do my due diligence. Central has automatically compiled a list of related targets that I can inspect. There may be also a formal approval process that happens before the app is green-lighted from the compliance team. Once I got the all clear, I will cast my admin vote to promote this app to the permanent allow list. Users will not have to request permissions to use the app anymore. Because our company policy is allow listed means managed, the app is now available through the company managed software center and its journey is complete. Thanks for watching.